And we're live. How's everybody doing this evening or this morning, depending on where you're viewing from? Sulha is back, and I cannot be more excited. I know you've probably all noticed we took a little hiatus, but here we are back with weekly content. This is actually going to be one of two streams we're having this week. Me and a nice crew of people that actually met through the Sulha Discord, took a trip to Ramallah and Bethlehem yesterday. So we're going to do a live stream just to talk about how that was, what we learned, our experience. So stay tuned for that. That will be Wednesday at 8 p.m. Jerusalem time. Today, we actually have a special guest that I've been meaning to bring on for a while. We finally made it happen. Those in the chat, let me know where you're from, where you're tuning in from. Would love to hear you. Good to see you, Gurfa. Good to see you, Pierre. Cool. Our guest, without further ado, Arnon Degani, a historian of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's the author and host of the Oslo Podcast by MOLAD. He's also a postdoctoral fellow at Hebrew University Center for Contemporary Jewry. Arnon, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be here, Adar. I've been told by so many people that I have to do your show, and I'm glad that I finally had the chance to do it. Thanks.
There we go. We finally did it. So Arnon, your camera's a little bit low. If you can change the angle a little bit. Yeah. Now you're upside down.
No, I'm upside down.
Let's see. Yeah, that's a great angle. If you could get to stand like that.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be a great angle, wouldn't it? Here, I know.
We've been off air for a few months, so you could see I'm a little rusty. We should have had that worked out, but all good. It makes for good content. Hey, Zohar, good to see you in the chat. How you been, brother? Floodland 9999. Good to see you too. Oh, we lost Arnon, but we'll get him back. Yeah, guys. So look, since we're back, when we took this little hiatus, I actually messaged all our patrons and told them to discontinue their patronage because I didn't feel right taking money when the channel wasn't active. Surprisingly, a fair bit left their patronage going, but the Patreon is now back open. So if you want to support the show, we'd love your support. It will help us continue to do this content. For those who don't know, I'm very busy building a company now. If you want to know more about that, you can check out the live stream I did 2 weeks ago to learn more about what I'm doing. But moving forward, the channel will not be run by just myself. We have a team of people that are going to be doing it, and the Patreon will be to support all those people as well. And yeah, let's there we go, Arnon, looking great. Yeah. Great angle.
Excellent.
So let's just start by, I want to know more about you, your work as a historian, and your involvement in the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Right. So I was born 1981 in Israel. I standard privileged childhood. Everything was fine. Happy family. And then at 18, I joined the army. I had what's called in Hebrew profil namuch, a low medical grade, and I went into an intelligence unit. March of 2000. 6 months later, everything changes, and I get this kind of gnawing feeling that this is the war of my generation, the second Intifada. I have friends who are in combat service, and I decide that I'll go to a medical committee to raise my medical standing, and I did that, and I joined the Golani Brigade. I wasn't in the shit for that long because I started a year later, and I was discharged 2 years later. But I did do significant amounts of times in the territories, in the more kind of mundane aspects of the occupation. Not, I didn't off any mega terrorist. And I was released, of course, in terms of in terms of difficulty and victimhood. Of course, I was by far better off than the Palestinians I encountered every day, to say the least. But I did come out of there with a feeling that we have no idea, Israelis, certain Israelis at least, what's going on a half hour from our homes. And that's that. I mean, I was science all the way, and I decided I'm just going to go for Middle Eastern studies. Right then, like right after the army, bachelor degree, master's degree in Tel Aviv, bachelor's in Ben Gurion, and then off to UCLA for my PhD. And if the service kind of made me question some of the foundations of my Zionist upbringing, and you can imagine that being in an academically sound department in a university of Middle Eastern studies, that usually pulls you to the left even more if you decide to take what your lectures and books are telling you as the truth. Not everyone does that. And so I was all in favor of writing a dissertation about the Palestinians in Israel before 1967, in a time that they were subject to martial law. And that, for me, that was a huge discovery also, that the sort of a type of regime that I was part of in the year 2000, 2001, and 2 existed in between 48 and 67 within the Green Line. For me, it was an astonishing discovery, and I wanted to know more about that. And I thought I'd be writing the prequel to the post-67 occupation, the occupation before the occupation. And, I was in a West Coast university, in a top 20 history department. The political mood there is I would say post-Zionist, would be in the center, and would be the moderate view there. Maybe I'm exaggerating. And I was, I had my own personal identity as a Zionist, as an Israeli, but the direction was of a certain type. And as I was researching and writing the dissertation, I realized that a lot of the things that are said about Israel and Zionism in academia, in leftist academia, in radical leftist academia, especially when it has to do with the term settler-colonialism, is inaccurate, superficial, and completely it's kind of like a fad now. I haven't become right wing. It's not a kind of a Glenn Greenwald transformation. Not to say that I'm of the caliber of that person or of the audience. It's nothing like that, but it's a more nuanced. I'm in Israeli terms, I'm still thoroughly of the left, and I know that the spectrum can go much further than what it is in Israel. But I did realize a few things about Zionism using the term settler colonialism, though, in a way that's not just as a way of saying Zionism is bad, right? It's also not a way of saying that Zionism is good. It's a way to analyze Zionism. And once you analyze Zionism, it becomes a historical phenomenon that can be deconstructed and compared and rationalized, and not turned into this kind of essence, which Zionists, by the way, think is good, and anti-Zionists think it's bad, but they actually have a common understanding of a certain essence that I see is much more ambiguous than is commonly narrated. Now, do you want me to? Where should we go from here?
Well, I'd actually like to go deeper into the term settler colonialism and how that applies to Israel, and what you think the disconnect is, if you think there's any legitimacy to the argument, or is it just completely bullshit. We finally have somebody on the show who's not just an activist, but actually a scholar on this matter, because the term settler colonialism is very triggering for Israelis or those in the pro-Israel camp. So, I'd like to hear it from an academic, like based on your research, based on your understanding, how does that term apply?
The best example I always bring, this is on every show and most Twitter threads I begin, and some articles. The best example of a well constructed argument that uses the settler colonialism paradigm would have to be, probably the first one, is by a very famous, and this is a common joke I make, I'm sick of myself already, a very famous anti-Zionist BDS supporting scholar or commentator, activist called Zev Jabotinsky. He made an exit. Now, this isn't the discovery of the Zionists having the term colonial within their early institutions. This isn't that, right? This is I'm referring to the article on the Iron Wall in 1923, which is basically the declaration of a new stream of Zionism, which is more hawkish, less optimistic about the ability to find some sort of common ground with the Palestinian Arabs that are there. And he writes, I would say, essentially the right-wing manifesto of Zionism, the revisionist Zionism, you could say. And obviously you cannot suspect Jabotinsky to harbor any anti-Zionist and thoughts, or political goals, but he wants to analyze, I would say, objectively and from some sort of academic distance, and what is the status of Zionism and its relationship with the Palestinian Arabs, and to explain, to make the argument why a certain type of behavior or policy is better than another one. He compares Zionism to other settler projects, namely the ones in America, North and even Latin America. And he says, he puts aside the narrative of Zionism, which he thinks is entirely based on history and correct and righteous, of people returning to their land. He puts that on the side, and he says, what do we appear like to the Palestinian Arabs? And he actually uses that word, Palestinian Arabs. He modifies the Arabs with the Palestinian. They are a special type of Arabs that are connected to this land. And he says this is their national MOLAD. I forgot the term used in the English translation. And of course, I don't even know Russian, but this is their national homeland, or something like that, right? And he says, as far as our relationship is concerned, the justifications for Zionism, the biblical, the moral, the I would say maybe cultural in terms of advancement and all that, those are irrelevant to the people who we are bound to live with. We, to them, are exactly like the white settlers of the non-European world. Let's just say that. He uses Aborigines, and he says the Sioux tribes in North America. And as much as the white settlers might have good intentions, and we know in hindsight that that's also debatable, but the point for Jabotinsky is that's irrelevant. The native population, and he says native population, not because he thinks Jews don't have any rights, right? But the structure between them, between Zionist settlers, who objectively just recently came, right? And the people who were already there, which is also a hard truth, right? The relationship that will be formed between these two will be the relationship between settlers and natives. And that is how scholars, I don't care about activists throwing that term, right? But at least scholars, that's how they should use this term, as a sort of, this is a relationship between two groups that are defined by their objective to the land, right? The natives are the ones that would like to keep a status quo, or would be more apprehensive to things changing, demography, sovereignty, political institutions, and there are those that would like those things to change: land ownership, sovereignty, political institutions. And that is what defines settlers, and that is what defines natives, not the cosmic, religious, cultural, historic even connection to the land. And am I making myself? Is there? I'm just pausing.
Yeah. No. So I guess I have a few follow-ups. I'm trying to think what the best place to start, because I really want to go as deep. It seems.
Okay. So once he established, let's follow Jabotinsky for like 5 more minutes. All right.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. I could tell already that this session is dedicated to settler colonialism. That's where we're going to go, because this is a deep and contentious topic, and I already have a lot of follow-ups, so we're going deep. So whoever's watching now, you could expect a conversation on settler colonialism for at least the next 30 minutes, and then we'll try to do a little Q&A with the audience. So
Cool.
Stay tuned. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Arnon, all you.
So continuing Jabotinsky's, not Rashid Khalidi, Jabotinsky's argument, right? He says that there is no use in seeking compromise with the indigenous or native Palestinian Arabs, because to them, we are invaders, full stop. So offering binational state, obviously partition, there's just no sense in it, because for them, this is their national home. They have no other, not Baghdad and not Damascus. And the only way to go forward is to just make sure that we cannot be removed and erect an iron wall. And that's the title of that essay. Now, the idea is, though, that at a certain point, right, the indigenous people realize that the settler isn't going away, and then they become open to some sort of compromise. Now, the way this translates into how I think about Zionist history and Palestinian history and the history of the conflict is that is that from the beginning, the native population has this aversity to change, and the settler population constantly wants to transform the land so it will be hospitable. Now, the thing standing in the way of a settler movement from consolidating, right, is always going to be the native presence. And so, unlike colonialism, right, which requires native presence because colonialism is premised on exploitation, right? Settler colonialism is the relationship involves features more of elimination, more of the problem needs to disappear. The native problem needs to disappear. Now, I know this, you know, the connotations materialize in cases of genocide and ethnic cleansing that arguably happened in Israel-Palestine. But that is the structural cause, right? When a settler population sees a certain piece of land as its own, it needs to uproot the people who were there before. It's very simple. So on the other hand, colonizing nation, which has an empire and has interest in exploiting those faraway places, this you? Oh.
Yeah. My bad. My phone's on silent.
Anyways, so elimination versus exploitation of colonialism. It's and at this point, it's very important to emphasize that settler colonialism, in this way that I talk about it, is not a type of colonialism. It is sometimes coexists with colonialism historically, but as a structure, as an analytical framework, it works very differently. It's not a type of.
Okay.
So elimination can be done in several ways. The main way, the obvious way, our guts tell us, oh, okay, so it's going to be a zero-sum game of violence, right? And that, of course, happens in every case. But what also happens in every case, and that depends on the circuit and the way and the timing and the characteristics of that other way of eliminating natives, that happens because of historical circumstances, global and local and everything. And that other way of eliminating natives, other than naked violence, is a measure of assimilation or absorption. And that also always happens. There is always some measure, and sometimes sometimes on a very intensive scale, of a biological absorption, and that happened throughout the United States with Elizabeth Warren being a living example of that. But also the entry of Indian nations into treaties with the United States and with Canada, and mutual recognitions and weaving the indigenous populations, obviously always in a subordinate status, never very much materially well off, but as part of the emerging settler nation. And that always happens as well. And it happens at the same time almost. And the violent process, and I would say, not that assimilation is never violent. The boarding schools will attest to that. But these two types of it's counterintuitive to think that fusing settlers and natives, and on the other hand, physically eliminating natives, structurally work rather similarly. But that is right. the kind of big deal.
So,
and yeah,
I wanna talk more about the counter arguments, right? So you're making the case for why Zionism is settler colonialism, but I think for the case to be strong, it needs to be based on more than just Jabotinsky's essay, and needs to address the counter arguments. So I'm going to present these arguments, and so we'll go deeper here.
But here's how I would phrase the debate, even, right? There's nothing essential to Zionism. Zionism moves through history. It changes. I don't want to address Zionism as some Orientalists would address Islam or Judaism, right? This is a cultural system that is susceptible to historical circumstances. The question I, as a scholar, am interested in is whether a settler-colonial analytical framework helps us understand better the history of the conflict, with no need to say Zionism is settler colonialism, full stop. Okay, but by all means, right. I would say that in the op-ed and in the kind of daily conversations, yes, Zionism is settler colonialism, and please present the counter arguments.
Cool, and then we will get to what the benefit of this label is, and what you think, what it actually matters, and what we could do moving forward. Okay.
Sure.
So I think the most common counter is, and you might have to explain if there's a distinction between colonialism and settler colonialism, but the most common counter is a colony of what mother nation, right? This is what we commonly hear. It wasn't, we didn't come from a specific nation. We came as refugees. We came as an indigenous people returning, right? That's the most common counter. So what would you say to that?
That is the most common, and I don't want to be too cocky, but very easy to face.
Debunk. Yeah, cool. Let's hear
it. So again, I am using a certain language, a certain scholarship, a certain writing that not everyone uses, because not everyone is interested in really enjoying the benefits of this framework. They're interested in saying Zionism sucks, right? So settler colonialism, by definition, many times settler colonial movements really originated from a very distinct mother country, right? And that, I would say the United States and Canada would be examples of that, right? Maybe New Zealand and Australia as well, and all of them being Great Britain. But what distinguishes settler colonialism from colonialism is a measure of distinct sovereignty. Is how much does the person leaving that his or her or their place of origin, how much do they carry with them an identity that is seamless, that is fused with the place they came before? Now, inasmuch as they see themselves as emissaries of the mother country, then they are colonialists. They might make a place their new home, right? They might build a house there. They might buy property, but for them, home is back. Okay, they have the ability to come back. Settlers have a tendency, and of course these are ideal types, right? So settlers have a tendency to burn the boats, right? So so the movement, and so as the United States was being created, right, as the colonies were being formed, not only Americans came, not only British people, subjects came, Irish and then Italians and Germans and Swedes, right? They have no connection to the to Britain, right? They are leaving Europe and assuming a new type of identity of a colonial American. Something new is being formed. Now, again, the tie does not necessarily need to sever completely. It has severed in the case of the United States. United States has a completely different flag than Britain. It is a different nation. It declared independence. It cut the cord. Canada is in the settler colonial nation that is still somehow bound to the British Kingdom. So is Australia and even New Zealand, right? So you could say that Canada is a part of an imperial structure, right? But it has ascertained, it has achieved a measure of sovereignty that allows it to interact within the nation state system as an independent state, right? And so it is true that Zionism stands out for not having a core, for not having a core population that was sent by a well-defined polity. That is 100% true. Zionism stands out from others, but that feature of not being associated and not carrying with it the identity and the politics and the sovereignty of the nations they came before only makes them closer to the ideal type of settler colonialists. So what defines a settler colonialism, a settler colonial rather than a colonial, is their degree of distinctness from the place that they came from. And if that degree is very high, that actually makes them settler colonial. It's true that Zionism is distinguishable from, like, this framework, right? It does not argue that Israel and Zionism is the same as as white settlement in North America. It says that they are comparable. Comparable means that there are certain things that are similar and different. So yes, the difference would be, right, that they are that these are one is a political project of the British Empire. The other only became one in 1920, in 1917 and onwards, right? But the fact that the Americans at a certain point developed an identity that is very distinct from the British, and the fact that the Jews from the get-go develop a distinct identity from Poland or Germany or Morocco or Iraq, that actually doesn't exclude them from being settler colonial. That is actually a defining character, a sense of distinct sovereignty. I'll say that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What was the term settler colonialism distinct from colonialism prior to Zionism, or was it a term that was created to describe a different form of colonialism?
In the 70s, certain historians with economic background discerned Europe outside of Europe, discerned a kind of phenomenon of countries that managed to build a market economy and political institutions similar to the ones in Europe, not in Europe. and yet independent states. And so that is a common feature of how that has happened, how certain types of capitalist structures expanded throughout the world, but not via empire, but via new nations that are formed outside of Europe. And so, to answer your question, I would say that an understanding of a sort of distinct, a distinct societal function, that is societal formation that is formed through movement, right? I think that's in the 70s and 80s. Economists and certain historians with economic history, and then in the late 90s, Patrick Wolf is the one that he's a Australian scholar. He's the one that noticed the different structure of settler colonialism as opposed to colonialism. And in the 90s, this is the era of everything's becoming colonial, right? In the social sciences and humanities. And so I would say Patrick Wolf was the one. Wait. Not every aspect of white people oppressing brown people neatly fits within the colonial paradigm.
So just to summarize, colonialism and settler colonialism, as you describe it, really comes down to the relationship between groups of people. One, as you would describe, a native population, the other as a population moving into the land. And what distinguishes between colonialism and settler colonialism is the amount of connection those people have with the nation they are coming from. Israel being the greatest form of settler colonialism because they were not sent by any nation. And would you say maybe
another different, so settlers are different from their connection to their mother country, and they differ in how they relate to the indigenous population, in the sense that they have no wish to exploit them or no inherent wish to exploit them, but they want the land, they want them gone.
Okay, so settler colonialism is less about the exploitation, but more so about the replacement and
right.
So, just so I could get a reference point of more traditional colonialism, would that be like the British in India, for example?
Perfect example. And cool. I would say another thing. Now, if you learn Said, and if you studied Said, not the cliche that certain leftists have made him, right? But Said himself, he talks about a dichotomous world. And not only him, Fanon and Memi, colonized colonizer, right? That it's true that there are many shades. There could be different types of colonized people. There could be different types of natives. You know, the Sikh were elevated, more elevated within the structures of the British Empire, rather than other South Asian groups. And yet, what defines a colonial empire, it's like a big state. Don't imagine 19th century Britain as an island. It's a huge state that its defining feature, its raison d'être, that is the difference between colonized and colonized, between subject and citizen. It's a dichotomous world. There's two. Settler colonialism, you put the settler in the middle of the scheme. The settler has to deal with an indigenous who does not want to disappear, and he has sometimes to deal with an outer force, right, who wants to retain control over that territory in a certain way. And so if you ever see a triangle, a triple relationship, a settler who is dealing with an indigenous other, we are not them. We are not those people that we just encountered. And yet it also deals with an exogenous other, such as a imperial overlord, some sort of the federal government, if you're talking about the Western territories, some sort of outer threat or other, or something you need to navigate politically. So this is a relationship of three, and two ain't three. And so that's where you can draw the difference. And this is something that Lorenzo Veracini, another Australian scholar, picked up on.
So, it's interesting, and I'm seeing resistance in the comment section, which is not uncommon. There's tremendous resistance from Israelis to reject terminology used to describe Israel. I would say the two biggest ones would be settler colonialism, and the second would be apartheid. And if I'm to make the argument as to, well, if I'm to try to understand why this is offensive to many Israelis, it's because there's there is an attempt to demonize Israel at any expense. And I guess Israelis feel like this is trying to, at least the term settler colonialism is trying to perpetuate the idea that Jews are not of this land, that we're just Europeans who came to take it over. And apartheid is just trying to draw parallel with the white man oppressing the black man, right?
Right.
Now, at the same time, I've never really been triggered by these words because I see we have a challenging situation here on the land, and people are doing their best to describe that situation. And I do think some of the terms are charged, but when you're trying to create a movement or change public opinion, you want to use words that describe a situation harshly in order to change public opinion. And I actually don't think that's inherently wrong. I think if you see a problem in the world, you want to convince people it's a problem, you need to use language to describe that. And it seems like generally the counter arguments are just getting caught up on these little semantics. But really, we need language to describe words. And it's like, I would say people who are offended by this language should probably just focus on solving the issues rather than looking for semantic counters, because they're not so convincing. I don't care if you call it settler colonialism or something else. I really don't think to me it doesn't matter much, but I do understand where it comes from, and I'm not offended by the terminology. I think we need to describe it some way. I guess I want to know more from you. You did mention that you think that the scholars aren't describing Israel correctly. So you did have some critique of how it is described in academia. That's not quite accurate, but yet you do hold that it's settler colonialism. And I guess I want to hear what you think the importance of this descriptor is.
There is a odd consensus between those that use the term freely and abundantly, and those that condemn the usage of this term as being anti-Semitic, right? They both perceive settler colonialism as the same thing, and they are both wrong, unless in the ways I use it, right? This type of settler colonialism is a type of colonialism, is a mindset that is derived from the idea that since we are in the post-colonial era, we should be in the post-Zionism era, right? But if people truly absorbed what it means that Israel is the settler colonial, that the Zionist relationship with the Palestinians is a settler colonial relationship, right? If people understood what that means, it means we Zionists ain't going away. That's what it means.
Right. So that's why Wait, so you is that why you take issue with the descriptor because you think settler colonialism implies that the settler population should leave, but in our instance, that's not what's going to happen or what should happen?
The way I use it, the scholarly way I use it, which is the correct way, and I have to be modest, right? Places Zionism on a course of indigenization, like whites in North America, right? And I think that Israel in 48 achieved it to a certain extent, 67 even more. And then certain things that happened after 67, made it difficult for the situation to normalize. But even now, I don't think the idea that sovereign Jewish presence in Israel is in constant is about to disappear. The graveyards are literally filled with people who thought that this could happen. Look, once people from the anti-Zionist scholarly circles, once they understand that I am placing, I'm actually suggesting a route for Zionist triumph that might even include a binational state, right? Binationalism, there is binationalism that works in a settler colonial scenario, the one in New Zealand, right? There's there are multinational arrangements, such as in Canada, right? Kind of a multicultural tapestry of the Canadian nation. In any case, any Jew that wants to remain liot chofshi be'artzenu, wants to make this land his home, right? To be recognized as an indigenous, he's preoccupied with the act of settler colonialism. And so it obviously includes those that wish to transfer all the Palestinians to Jordan, but it also includes those who want to see maybe like Beinart, like a state that serves two nations in its constitution. And it also includes those who think that sovereignty should be shared, but with a border between these two groups. But the land itself that belongs to the two people should be shared in the framework of two states. All of these are settler colonial solutions, narratives, or trajectories, right? I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Well, so a solution that, like, what solution are you looking towards?
I'm not looking towards, as a scholar, right? I'm not as a historian. There's very little I can say about where we're headed to. Honestly, I'm not being coy. But any type of solution that is offered, right, is a settler colonial solution in the sense, as long as the Jews get to stay, right?
So you're saying settler colonialism is not inherently wrong then?
So remember when I said elimination, turning to elimination, right? So elimination doesn't necessarily, it's the political elimination that is most important. You can achieve that by physically eliminating, right? But you can also achieve that by getting the natives to sign up into a regime in which they have no more privileges or don't claim privileges just because they were, and I'm doing there first, right? Once the indigenous recognizes the settler as a co-indigenous, then his own indigeneity is superfluous, has no political meaning.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so a recognition of Israel's right to exist from a Palestinian state, that would be saying, okay, the Israel's sovereignty, its current demographics, all of these are legitimate in the way from the recognized leadership of the Palestinian people. What more could a settler want? Not to say that we have achieved that moment, not to conclude that Arafat gave up everything and Arafat was Yasser Arafat was worthy of the peace prize. I'm not saying he wasn't, but I mean, that's the goal, right?
Would you consider like a Palestinian national state also a form of settler colonialism?
If Jews are not recognized within the constitution of any emerging state, right, as at least holding collective rights, then there's no Zionism, right? And at that point, I don't really know if it's settler colonialism or not. But Zionism it ain't, for sure. But assuming that this country is a peaceful and democratic country, in which materially and in terms of personal safety, you being of Jewish origin or you being of Palestinian origin doesn't matter. We're all this one nation, right? Then I guess you could say that that is an indigenization of Jews from Europe and the rest of the Middle East within a new state, and that would be, I would say, the South African group, right? But I'd say that is where Zion that is hard to say that would be a Zionist. That would be a Zionist.
Well, I mean,
but binationalism for sure. Binationalism was part of Zionism for decades.
So a one-state solution, a binational state, is also a form of settler colonialism.
For sure.
So pretty much any solution, well, I guess no solution really seems realistic right now, but any solution that doesn't involve Jews needing to leave the land or that recognizes Jewish rights on the land would be settler colonialism. So, yeah, okay, interesting. So you're not using it in a politically charged way. So that's why you say for you it's just very academic, because you're like, so you support a settler colonial solution based on your definition.
Yeah, but you also.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure.
No, and I know that a priori, because if you're talking about solutions, right, then you are talking about the normalization of Jews in this country, right? Which I would say is 99% achieved, right? BDS has not, I would say, a successful movement, right? And, whatever damage that a campaign here or there might do, it would compare nothing to the recognition by the Gulf states that was recently granted, right?
Right.
And so I would say that there's a normalization of Jews, and I would even say there's maybe too much normalization. I would like Israel to face some sort of sanctions because of what is going on in the territories, and yet the actual existence of Jews here as sovereigns, I don't think it's questioned, and there's just this last thing to do to consolidate that. And in my opinion, it involves ending the occupation.
Which for you would just be a full withdrawal from 67.
That could be that, or the granting of citizenship.
Or the granting of citizenship.
Yeah. But here, let me point out to you something interesting, though.
Yeah, real quick. Real quick, Arnon. Chat, we're gonna sign off in just a few minutes, but we will take one or two questions. So ask them now. We will prioritize super chats because we're back in business. So let them rip. Yeah, Arnon, all you.
Hi. Am I supposed?
Yeah.
Is there in the chat?
No, not yet. I just want to tell the chat that they could ask questions now, but you were gonna say something. Oh, we lost him. Arnon. You know, it's interesting because, you know, he's using a term that, you know, many Israelis are triggered by. Even people on the chat take issue with that term, and I'm sympathetic as to why. But he's clearly using it very academically because he says that he supports a settler-colonial solution. A binational state, in his opinion, would be settler-colonial. So it's interesting. I guess a challenge with that framing. He's back. I'm just going to finish this thought, Arnon. So I was saying, you know, I was kind of explaining how much you do use it in an academic sense, and people are offended by your use of the term settler colonialism, but you're also accepting a settler colonial solution because you're not using it as some politically charged term in order to say Jews need to leave the land. You're just saying this is actually, in fact, what it is. It seems, though, like many activists can use that same definition they may justify the ethnic cleansing of Jews because they're like, we will refuse any solutions that's a settler colonial solution, including a binational state. It needs to be Palestine from the river to the sea, our land, right? And they would say anything but that would be settler colonialism.
Right. Except, and Palestinians and Palestinian leaders are smart. The leftist activists in the United States aren't as smart as the Palestinians themselves. Most Palestinians have understood that that's not going to happen. And I'm including that Hamas, by the way. That the Hamas's agenda, we just want to create a state at this point, an enemy state to Israel that's on its borders within the territories. And once that happens, you know, we'll become like Syria, or we could become like Syria. They're not revealing all their cards now, but the green line is something that the majority of the Palestinians in their politics, not necessarily in their imagination or in their feelings and identity, have understood to have some sort of political significance. Now, let me point out an interesting issue. A lot of the confusion, I think, is also caused by the prominence of the Algerian case in colonial and post-colonial thought. Now, Algeria, right, there's a very important book that's written in the 80s, I think 83, maybe 88, about settler colonialism in Algeria, right? It was written by a scholar called Prochaska from Minnesota. It's an excellent book. And he uses settler colonialism there. But I don't fault him like the others, like the contemporary ones, because that was the thing that was unique about colonialism in Algeria. The fact that there were a lot of French settlers there, right? But in the final analysis, you have to ask yourself, what was the agenda of the settlers up until the very last moment? Did they want to become an independent nation from France? Or was their entire politics revolving around keeping their privileges as French citizens? And it's the latter. And so I don't mind, you can use settler colonialism to explain aspects of the Algerian case, right? But in the final analysis, it resembles more of a colonialism because the people that left Europe and France retained their French citizenship And that's why when colonialism withdrew, they withdrew with it. They did not stay put, right? And that is also an interesting way to look at the settlers in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip until 2005. These people leave a certain territory, which is Israel proper or within the Green Line. They move to another territory, carrying with them Israeli sovereignty. There is some sentiment of Medinat Yehuda, of the Judea, right? But in the mainstream of the settler movement, they are Israelis. And they cherish their superiority compared to their natives, to their neighbors who the Palestinians live there, and they have many of the settlements were built by by Palestinian labor, and as much as some settlers have fantasies of transfer, which would be a settler-colonial, the policies on the ground have not eliminated Palestinians. There's more, right? So the relationship between Israel and the territories, if we use this language and this way of thinking, resembles more a colonial relationship. And so that is why even today, even post-Trump, that is why the occupation has never been normalized. Because it is more of a colonial construct that more or less disappeared in the 60s. More or less, of course. Still, there are cases. So that's my piece.
Yeah, so you're saying if like Israeli settlers weren't actually Israelis, but they were to renounce their Israeli citizenship because they wanted to be Judeans, right? They want to live on the hilltops of Judea and Samaria, then it would be settler colonialism, and you think
more proximate to the settler colonial model. I'll say that. You don't even need to talk in absolutes.
Right. Okay. Well, look, this was very insightful. I learned a lot. It's a topic I've wanted to take a deeper dive into for a while now, so I definitely appreciate everything you shared. I still need to reflect on it and see how I take this newfound knowledge and work it into a reconciliatory framework, because that's really, my goal here. How do we build a unified narrative between both peoples? How can we have a conversation where both sides are able to understand one another without being extremely triggered? And language is of utmost importance when having these conversations. So I think it was useful. I do need to reflect on it and see how I apply it to the work we're doing here. I would love to have you on again. I think we could go a lot deeper. I'm sure maybe somebody would also want to debate you on this. So if you're interested, we could maybe set up a debate on the topic, or we could talk about another topic. If you feel called, just let me know. To those viewing, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe. You could get in touch with Arnon. You could see his Twitter in the description, but I want to link them your podcast as well. Can you send me a link to that? We'll drop it in the chat. I'll put it in the description.
I can send you a link, but also you can, it's currently it's in Hebrew, so Hesket Oslo. Hesket would be the Hebrew word for podcast. So Hesket Oslo, similar to Heskem Oslo, and nice pun. And just look at it. Search for in your favorite podcast application.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arnon. We will be in touch soon. Thank you, guys. Tune in Thursday. We're going to have another stream to talk about our recent trip to Ramallah and Bethlehem. It was an interesting one.
Adar, thanks so much. This is you're a real pro. Thanks.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.